I call Brett Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in support of this New Zealand Business Number Bill in its third reading. I know the previous speaker, Dr. Clark, showed, it's actually pleasing to see, he showed a very strong interest in small and medium business. But actually the New Zealand public were asked very recently, Mr. Speaker, as to what they thought of the opposition and their plans. And I think the public showed very strongly that they seem to believe that the quickest and easiest way to massively grow the number of small businesses in New Zealand would be to put Labour in charge of the large ones.
Point of order, Claire Curran.
This is a third reading speech, and this is a speech about a government bill and not about the Labour Party.
I am listening carefully to the content, and any relevance is a matter for me to rule on. And I'm asking Brett Hudson to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I think that was well borne out, actually, in the contribution that Dr. Clark had to make. Now, we've seen this, and sitting on the Select Committee, we've seen this bill go through each of the stages, go through the submissions process, advice from officials, and then when we hit the Committee of the Whole stage, what we saw was, quite frankly, a reckless amendment suggested on the floor, one that would force agencies to have to set aside other business, other technology business, other business work, simply to meet an arbitrary deadline that the opposition might like to place. Now, Mr. Speaker, when I spoke on that and when I reflected after the Committee of the Whole as we head into this reading, I first thought, is this merely an illustration that the opposition don't understand technology? And it could well be that. But then on further reflection, I was worried that actually perhaps it is more symbolic of that they don't understand business, that they didn't actually grasp what they would be asking public sector agencies to set aside in order that they might meet some arbitrary deadline set by the opposition. Just earlier this evening, we were debating the tax transformation first phase simplification bill. This is a tax transformation program that is going to last a number of years at Inland Revenue. The opposition would have Inland Revenue set that aside, Mr. Speaker, simply to have met the amendment, the requirements of the amendment that they supported in the Committee of the Whole. So I wondered if perhaps they simply didn't grasp the business, and then it occurred to me that it could be worse. It could actually be the case that because they realise that Parliament, as being sovereign, has the right to impose any conditions it chooses upon society, upon individuals, upon public sector agencies, that just because they could, they would. And they would do so without giving any consideration as to the other business, the other activities that those agencies are obliged to be delivering over the next 1, 2 or even more years. Quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, the amendment and the Labour amendment to the amendment were not only reckless, they were feckless.
Order. In a third reading, you can mention in passing, there is a Standing Order 137.4. You can mention in passing amendments that have been defeated, but you can't dwell on them at length. So I'll ask the member to come back to the content of the third reading speech.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what we do have in the House at the third reading is the bill unamended, which will provide a mechanism for small and medium businesses in particular to be able to undertake their interactions with the government in a much more cost and time effective manner. One which will help them to avoid the troubling and quite frankly wasteful exercise of doing things like repeating such basic public information as the nature of your business, the address, that public register of information, but having to repeat that with every agency you deal with, if any of that should change, even such as an address if you relocate, having to provide that update to every single agency. This is a very effective and pragmatic bill, Mr. Speaker. I've enjoyed working on it through each of the stages. It does appear it will pass in the House tonight, and I commend this bill to the House.